Hey everybody, it's Matt. This is a 10-minute Bible hour, and we're going to talk about Moses and Jesus and how they relate together in just a minute. But first, check this out. I got candy cigarettes. Do you remember these things? They're delicious. They really are. They taste like hardened toothpaste a little bit, but they're super, super good. I always really wanted these things when I was a kid, but my parents were like, no, you can't. You got to take those back to the gas station because they look like cigarettes. And cigarettes are bad. And I happen to agree. I think cigarettes are real bad for you. I think they're a bad idea. This is not me advocating for smoking. But I remember making the case with mom and dad, but they're not cigarettes. They're like cigarettes. You can't light them on fire and smoke them. I mean, I guess I never tried. But what is this in relation to a cigarette? Is it homage? Is this a way to be like, look, it's like cigarettes are great. And here's a tribute to cigarettes. Is it a cheap substitute or knockoff for people who aren't willing to go all the way and try the cigarette thing, but they still want to try these? Is it a gateway drug to get you to try cigarettes later? Might have been. I don't know. Maybe that's how these things started. Or is it some kind of coincidence that these just happen to look like cigarettes? I mean, come on. There's just too much in common to think that. Well, in a way, the same kind of questions apply to Moses and Jesus, except without the addictive tobacco element. Moses predates Jesus by, 1,200, 1,400 years. It depends on who you talk to. There are a couple different dates that are proposed for where Moses fits in all of it, but a really long time, all the way back from now to knights in shining armor and stuff, forever ago, right? And yet, they have so much stuff in common. And so it raises the question, all right, Jesus comes along, and he looks like Moses. He fulfills a role that seems like a symbolic completion of a bunch of stuff that Moses does. Is that just a thing that happened on accident, and maybe people tried to draw some comparisons between the two later on to bolster their case or their preferences? Or is this some grand master plan that God had put in place? I mean, to put it simply, is Jesus, because of his similarities to Moses, an homage to Moses? Is Jesus a cheap knockoff of Moses? Just a ripoff of all the interesting things like, hey, that worked once, let's do it again? Is Jesus coincidentally similar to Moses because maybe just all great leaders have a lot of the features of Moses? Or is it something more? Well, in this video, I want to talk about some of those points of comparison that are really uncanny between the two. I want to go back to that question about whether this is all a coincidence or homage or a ripoff or exactly how it fits together. I'm going to eat a couple more of these while I play a little bit of music, and then we'll get started. Moses and Jesus. What are they coming? Moses and Jesus. How are they different? Moses and Jesus. What are they coming? Moses and Jesus. Okay, similarities between Moses and Jesus. Here's my methodology. Here's how I came up with this list. First, I read Exodus a whole bunch, and then after that, I went and read the New Testament a whole bunch, and then I wrote down a list right over here of things that stood out. I'm probably not going to read them all, and you're probably going to think of some that I missed, but, broad strokes, we'll get the idea. Okay, similarity number one. Both Moses and Jesus were born under the reign of a tyrannical, awful ruler, and both Moses and Jesus had that tyrannical ruler flip their lid and start murdering babies. So Pharaoh was like, hey, we got entirely too many slaves. We got to control this population. He started having babies thrown into the river, which would have, again, another similarity, caused little baby Moses to have been swept up in that purge and killed. Herod, during the time of Jesus, according to the book of Matthew, did the same thing. It's like, there's a prophecy. There's a king that is to come. It's a threat to my rule. So they both felt threatened. And he has ordered the murder of all of these babies from a certain area. Jesus would have been swept up in that. Well, in this case, someone faithful who was looking out for them saw to their deliverance. The faithfulness of Mary and Joseph took care of Jesus. They got him out of danger. And the faithfulness of Moses' mom to put him in that basket, kind of jokes on you, Egyptians. You want to see babies put in the river? I got a way I'll put my baby in a river. To put the baby in the river, and instead of drowning him, floated him down to someone who then, here's another one, adopted that baby. Jesus was adopted by Joseph. Moses was adopted by an Egyptian lady who took pity on him and for his situation. Then we see that both have a reckoning with their identity, their family, their ethnic family, their family of faith. It's kind of the same thing. Moses comes to grips with the reality that his job is to be the deliverer of his people. Jesus seems pretty crystal clear on that he is to be the deliverer of his people all along. Moses is attempting to bring clarity and unity and liberty to his ethnic family that includes faith. Jesus is creating a whole new family of faith that transcends the boundaries of ethnicity. Both of them have an encounter with a woman at the well. For Moses, it points to what his task will be for the majority of his foreseeable future, which is to provide physical deliverance and physical protection against an injustice that was happening to this woman and her family at this well. Jesus has an encounter with the woman at the well, and it points to what he's going to do with his life, which is to provide spiritual deliverance, that he provides care in a way that transcends the physical. So we have this in common as well. Yes, I'm looking back over here at my notes to remember what else I wrote down, because I had some other ones that were pretty cool and kind of sneaky. Jesus' own people got real cranky with him at times. End of Matthew, it would be 12, because it's right before the Kingdom Parables discourse. Yeah, end of 12. Matthew has Jesus getting rejected by his own people, like his own family. He has tension with them. They don't seem to be totally on board with what he's doing. Jesus gets rejected at Nazareth a little bit thereafter. It is after, right? That's driving me crazy. That's the beginning of 14. Whatever. It's in Matthew is the point. Moses has people complaining at him all the time, angry at him, threatening him, unhappy with his leadership. And so it's not like either of these deliverers just walk into a room where everybody's just thrilled with them. They receive a lot of pushback from their own. Ultimately, the waters of baptism play into both. Jesus is baptized by John in Matthew chapter 3. Moses goes through the waters of baptism as the people are delivered by that passage through the water. I mean, I don't think I'm stretching it too much here. I think it's biblical to say that the one is meant to point to the other. And through the passage through this water, on the other side of that is the establishment of a new family. For Moses, it's the establishment of a new ethnic family of God. For Jesus, it's the establishment of a new family of faith, which once again transcends the boundaries of ethnicity. On top of that, you've got the plagues, the Passover. Oh my goodness, it's like the most obvious one of them all. With the Passover, you've got the slain blood of the lamb applied to the doorpost, and this causes the judgment of God, which is a very scary thing to think about, to pass over those houses that are covered by the blood of the lamb. I mean, for crying out loud, Jesus goes to the cross. Even the blood from his wounds essentially follows the same pattern as the doorposts on which the blood was applied at the Passover. I mean, and then just the theme of the Passover in general, which you forget this, but in the middle of the Exodus account, we step away from the narrative to be like, and that's how Passover happened, and here's how it worked, and this is where it came from, and then we pick back up with the narrative. Well, the Last Supper, Matthew 26, has Jesus sitting there with his disciples, and the fact that it is a Passover meal it's ripe with connections and fulfillment and completion of that stuff from the Old Testament, and how Jesus is going to be the fulfillment and completion of all of those themes of deliverance. Indeed, Moses' role as the lawgiver who goes up on the mountain for 40 days, like 40 days in the wilderness for Jesus. But Moses goes up on the mountain and he gives the law, and that law includes all kinds of details about sacrificial law, how to make things right when you screw things up. And all of it seems to have this theme of sort of staying the hand of God. But all of that law begs for some sort of supernatural completion, because no human can perfectly maintain all of that law. And then along comes Jesus, and he is the fulfillment and the completion of that law. And all the things that law doesn't get done, Jesus' work on the cross conquers, it completes, it fulfills. So you've got kind of the baptism sacrament, kind of the Lord's Supper, the Passover sacrament, that idea, the language of the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist is very built into and connected with the Passover, and then all of that equaling a family of faith on the other side of things that is meant to be in union with God and bringing glory to God. Again, if you're sitting here and you're like, I think you should have spent less time focusing on the candy cigarettes and more time focusing on your list because there's a bunch more stuff that could have gone on there. You are absolutely right. There is more. Well, that's awesome that you thought of it. But now that gives us a gist. We got one more big question to tackle, and that is, what is the relationship between these two? How is it best to be understood? Is it homage? Is it knockoff? Or is it something more? Spoiler alert, it's going to be something more.
Moses and Jesus walking down the street. How do you tell them apart?
Is Jesus a ripoff of Moses? No, that doesn't sum it up. Is Jesus a continuation of Moses? Yeah, that doesn't really sum it up. Is Jesus homage to Moses? That doesn't really sum it up. Is Jesus a prophetic fulfillment of Moses? I don't think that even really sums it up. I would say Jesus is the completion of Moses. And I think the most important verse, the pivotal verse of the whole book of Matthew, if you want to understand what Jesus is saying there, is Matthew 5:17, where Jesus is in the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. People have all these questions about him. He's like, hey, don't think that I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I haven't come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Fulfill, complete. And when we say the law and the prophets there, we don't just mean like cold predictions, like someone will one day come and he'll wear a blue hat and he will have a gray sword and he will arrive on the 11th of August and then you will know that that is the chosen one. It's not like that smoking gun kind of prophecy. Rather, the New Testament holds out Jesus as being the rounding out of all of the stories from the Old Testament. Just everything that's floating around there points to the culminating event, the culminating character in God's redemptive plan. And the Gospels, really all of the New Testament, just scream loud and clear, Jesus is the completion of everything. He's the end of all of the stories. He's the after credits scene you were just begging for to know where this thing goes next. He's the plot mechanism that needed to happen for all of that to come into focus and to make sense of what happened there. He is the fulfillment to the smoking gun prophecies where like there's going to be a guy and he's going to be there at this time. He's that too. He's the completion of all of it, including Moses. But we don't have to speculate about that in a general sense because Jesus is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. No, the Bible actually specifically speaks to this at the Transfiguration in Matthew chapter 17. Well, they go up there and God is there with Jesus, and Peter and James and John are up there on the mountain as well. And who else is there? Well, somebody who's well known for going up on mountains and glowing. It's Moses. He's there with them. And it's funny. I like this passage because Peter doesn't really know how to respond to it or what to do, but Moses, Elijah, God the Father, Jesus, Peter, James, and John, they're all up there together. Why is Moses there? Well, it's to make it crystal clear that Moses, even from beyond the grave, completely affirms that Jesus is the completion of Moses. He's not in competition with Moses. It's not like Moses represents one way that would totally work to be right with God and to be saved, and Jesus represents another, and it's a friendly rivalry. No, Jesus' thing was always meant to fulfill Moses' thing. Moses' thing was always an incompletion that demonstrated the hand of God being stayed against human failure and frailty, and an overly elaborate, complex system of sacrifices and laws that cover multiple different facets of life to even try to cobble together something that even creates an awareness of human failure and sin, that even points out human inability to truly live as subjects of the king in a kingdom run by the king. But Jesus comes along and it's like he solves the equation. All of that stuff just begged for completion. It never worked. Now here's Jesus. He is the Lamb. The blood on the doorpost, that's his blood. The sacrificial lamb that takes away the sins of the world, that's him on the cross. And so Moses showing up in Matthew chapter 17 is an indication that indeed Jesus is not a ripoff or a knockoff or even a friendly homage, but that Jesus is the completion of what Moses was all about as a character and Moses' work as well. Then Luke chapter 24, I'm not going to read it to you, but it's right at the end of Luke chapter 24 when Jesus is explaining stuff to the disciples on the Emmaus Road after he's risen from the grave. Now I'm going to read it to you. It's Luke 24. Jesus says to these disciples who didn't recognize him after he came back from the dead, "How foolish you are and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken." So, like, you're not getting it. You guys aren't connecting the dots. "Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. And then on the very next page, he goes and does the exact same thing when he connects back with like the inner circle of disciples. And so Even Jesus goes out of his way to be like, no, I am the completion specifically of Moses, not just generally the stuff that happened back in the day in Exodus and everything, but specifically of Moses. And then finally, super famous passage, Hebrews chapter 3. I'm really lucky that I flipped right to that. I could have looked stupid fumbling around that for a real long time. Hebrews chapter 3, starting in verse 3. I'm going to chew this because the Bible, I don't want to chew while I'm reading you the Bible. Just a second. This is really good. Almost got it. It's going to be worth it. Here you go. Jesus has been found worthy of greater honor than Moses, just as the builder of a house has greater honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but God is the builder of everything. Moses was faithful as a servant in all God's house, testifying to what would be said in the future, but Christ is faithful as a son over God's house, and we are his house if we hold on to our courage and the hope of which we boast. It's pretty straightforward if you look at the entirety of the Bible. The stuff in the Old Testament demonstrates the inability of humankind through our effort and intense discipline to bridge the gap between the infinite perfection of God and the flawed nature of us. There's this problem that is begging for a solution as you come out of the Old Testament, and it's that. The question that we talked about in the last video, what does it look like for a perfect God to live in community with imperfect people? We are begging for an answer to that question coming out of the book of Exodus and most of the stuff that we know about the life of Moses. And then Jesus comes along and answers the question. That is what it would take to make it work. The riches of God at the expenses of himself, of his own son. God would have to provide this ultimate and perfect sacrifice because ultimately humanity cannot work out this problem on its own, even through religious means that were set in motion by this one true God. Something greater has to occur, and Jesus fits lock and key into that solution. Moses, according to Hebrews 3, played the role, did the thing he was supposed to do. Jesus, the role he plays is the solution to the problem of sin and death. He is the culminating event of God's big redemptive plan. So is Jesus a Moses knockoff? Well, obviously not. Jesus is so much more than this is when compared with actual cigarettes. Jesus is the completion of the entire concept of Moses. He's the completion of the entire story and the entire direction of the narrative of the Old Testament. And if you have that in mind when you read the book of Exodus or the entire Old Testament in general, I think it makes the New Testament a way greater payoff. Hopefully it's fun kicking this stuff around. I sure enjoy hanging out with you. I'm Matt. This is a 10-minute Bible hour. Let's do this again soon.
Moses and Jesus. Moses and Jesus. What do they have in common? Moses and Jesus. How are they different? Moses and Jesus. What do they have in common? Moses and Jesus. How are they different? Moses and Jesus. Moses and Jesus. Moses and Jesus walking down the street. How do you